listening to the Marketing Personalities Podcast, a podcast for growth-minded entrepreneurs that serves up valuable insight and interviews about aligning your marketing strategy with your personality type. Because here's the deal. You shouldn't have to feel fake and salesy in order to grow your business. And you no longer have to. Your marketing strategy can feel good to implement and it can work. You can attract the right clients and customers to your business and grow your profits, all while staying true to who you naturally are. So in the name of honest business growth, bring your unique talents, perspectives, and personality to the table. And join us on this week's podcast episode to discover marketing that feels good for you. Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Personalities Podcast. I'm Brit, Kolo, and I'm here today with Lauren Caselli, who is the CEO of Lauren Caselli Events. Lauren, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about events and all the things.
And all the things. Yeah. Lauren and I are here today to discuss her event business, how she plans and manages such massive events for her clients, and the extra exciting, what I really want to dig into is how she's using a super cool hosting technique to create and foster great relationships. So before we dig into all of that, I'm so excited to get there. But before we do, you've got to get to know Lauren. So Lauren, tell us about your entrepreneurial life right now. What do you have your hands in?
Yeah, great question, especially now because I'm going through sort of a transition. So I've been in business for myself since 2013. I was living in New York City and in 2012 moved out to Montana to sort of take a break from all the event scene in New York, and then sort of just started doing some copywriting. Had always been a writer and really enjoyed writing. And so moved to Montana, wanted to stay, wanted to start a business. So I just started freelancing kind of casually, just seeing if I liked it. And so I started with copywriting and I worked with some marketing agencies in town and did a lot of web copy and all that stuff. And then in 2000, I think it was in late 2013, I had an introduction from a friend to a client who's looking to do a retreat for about 100 women. And she needed someone to help plan it. And I had a background in events at the time. And I thought, well, I can do that. And the event was going to be in North Carolina. So I was like, well, I can do that. I don't really know what it's like to plan an event remotely when your client is also remote. But we did it and executed it in 2014. And from that one event, after someone hired me one time remotely as an event planner, I was like, okay, I can definitely find more clients who will hire me remotely. So have been slowly growing the business for the last 5 years. And now we work with about, I think 6 to 8 clients per year on 8 to 10 events. So some clients we do 2 events for per year. And we primarily work in the Bay Area. So I'm in Montana, but we work in the Bay Area in California, a little bit in Montana, and then kind of all over the country. So we were just in Michigan last week, going to Palm Springs a couple weeks. So it's kind of fun because we get to live in Montana. We also get to travel, particularly in the winter when it's really cold here.
And that is key. I can only imagine. So tell us about the types of clients that you work with and the types of events you typically host. Are they mostly retreats like that first one, or have you branched out into a different industry, market, kind of place in the universe?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started really focusing on the online world, but what we realized was that a lot, at least in the beginning, or what I realized was that a lot of the client base that we wanted to work with were people who are using their events as a marketing tool to either build a community, strengthen their community, or essentially upsell attendees into a group program or something like that. And so we started kind of in the online space, people who had online courses, but where this is more common, where people use events more frequently to kind of bring their community together is in the software as a service and tech spaces. So that's why we work in California so much. It's a really common practice in technology, a user conference where you get all your clients together and you sort of teach them different aspects about your product, but you also have inspirational speakers or, workshops or fun things. And we're seeing that more and more, but kind of a couple of years ago when I started, it was more common in the technology industry. So most of our clients right now are venture capital firms, tech companies, software as a service company, So like think of ConvertKit, MailChimp. Those aren't our clients, but those are the types of clients we work with. So yeah, so that's who we normally work with. And that started basically, I had worked with one company. They had found me honestly via a Google search, which blows my mind. And they, I'd put something about tech, like tech events, written a blog post about exciting tech. And they found me through that blog post and they reached out and they said, we'd love to hire you for this event. And, once I had one tech company under my belt, then I started like sort of networking in those circles and going to user conferences myself. And then, yeah, I've done all kinds of things. Like to try to get my name out there. I flew to a conference to like help volunteer and also attend the conference. And then at the end, I was like, your event planner is not doing a good job. We could do a much better job. And then they hired us and they were a client for a couple of years. So yeah, there's all kinds. I'm definitely like a one-on-one, if I can get the person in the room, I know that I can sell them. So the hardest part is just identifying who I need to be in the room with.
That's interesting. And I kind of heard in there where getting your first client like this in like the SaaS and tech space through a Google search is mind blowing. But, that could have happened, let's say to anybody, but not just anyone could have turned that into an entire niche for their own company to which you're now known for. So there was something in there, right, that allowed you to take that and create a sustainable company through that. What I heard you say was once you had gotten that one tech company kind of on your client roster, had delivered for them, that then led you to network and attend more events in that industry so you could continue making a name and be able to say, hey, like I've done it for this company, I could do it for you. And that right there feels like something I need to underline for anyone listening and thinking about how to do this for themselves, this networking and then the attending the events in that industry can so totally work to, take one client and turn it into probably, that was in the beginning, probably tens of clients, right? Like at this point, and you only have to work with 60 clients a year to have a sustainable company here. So, wow, that's bravo. That's super cool.
Yeah. Thanks. And, I think sometimes people like, and certainly I, if I were on the front end doing strategy, I would be like, it's important to pick a niche. But like, the reality is I didn't really pick a niche. I sort of got a client. I really enjoyed working with them. They were kind of a more established technology company. And to be honest, they paid me on time. They sort of had a lack of resources. And so they trusted me in my decisions. It was a really great working relationship. And so it was less about the I'm so passionate about this industry, which now I love it, but it wasn't a choice. It wasn't like, I want to go after women's, magical, alternate retreats. I didn't like to choose an industry. I sort of just worked with a client who was great, loved them. And then I was like, okay, who do you know that I can work with that's sort of like you? And so not only asking my clients for referrals, but also just like identifying companies that they work with. Sometimes I'll be at an event and they'll have a client that comes to the event and they'll come up to me and be like, oh, we're thinking about doing a user conference. Do you have any recommendations? And so I'll send them a list of not even a sales email, but just here are 5 things I recommend you think of before you get started planning. And so building relationships that way. But yeah, I think for me, it was more important to be I'm building a company on a strong foundation. How do I make sure that clients that I'm working with pay on time, pay what I ask, don't, sort of do all the things that I don't like about working with some clients. And that ended up for me being technology. So yeah, so I would I just wanted to mention that. So if some people are like, oh, I'm struggling to figure out my niche, I'm like, I was not a person who chose it. I was a person who just really enjoyed working with a few clients and decided that was going to be my niche.
Yeah, well, that's really encouraging, right? I think that can get so many of us tripped up, especially in the conversations that I have on this podcast. It's always about okay, what lights you up? What's going to allow you to feel good? So when you show up feeling good, your audience is going to be attracted to that. And we can zero in on that based on personality type. We also might be able to find who you can best work with based on your personality type. But also you got to get out there and you got to put some stuff into play, especially if you're brand new, and find who you like to work with, right? And continue following those breadcrumbs as they appear. as you've done, and it's working for you. I like that. And one other thing that I heard you say is when you work with a client, the line that you said is, who do you know that I could work with that's like you? And maybe you like phrase it differently, but the idea is as you're working with that client who you've obviously created a great relationship with, asking that so crucial question to lead to the next client or clients. Who do you know that's like you that I could work with in the future? That is such a powerful question. And I would, we're going to talk about your specific personality type in a second, Lauren, but anyone in the business of getting referrals, I'm thinking of, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of INFJs, I'm thinking of ISFJs, INFPs. You guys, these referrals, because if you're not feeling super good about talking to lots of people all at once, and it's within those one-on-one conversations that you really shine, that question right there, get it in your script, in your process, in your workflow, in your client questionnaire that you send them after you've worked with them. Figure out who they would recommend you to if you enjoyed that client experience. I love it. So good. So I'm curious, Lauren, you are hosting and planning these pretty massive events, and you're calling them these user events. Has this planning and hosting of these events, has that always kind of been what you've been into? Does this feel like it comes pretty natural to you? Or is this something that you kind of got into professionally and have learned to become proficient at?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this probably will lead into, talking about kind of the events that I host for myself in my own business. But I am Italian and I grew up in a household that hosted a lot. My parents always hosted graduation parties and birthdays. And, my mom, even to this day, my mom is, she's in her like late 60s or mid 60s. And she, like to this day, will never hire a caterer for anything. She always does all of the cooking, no matter how many people are there. And so I grew up in these, in a household that was like a very massive, like coordinated effort pretty frequently. And so that sort of taught me about process and timing and guest experience, from a young age. And so things like when someone walks in the door, you have to make sure to take their coat and put it somewhere. Or, when they, enter into kind of the main space, how do you have to get them a drink and things like that. And so those kind of small details that are now a little bit more intuitive to me, or I learned them from watching my parents do it for most of my life. Now, those are things that I build into the guest experience every time we host an event. Because anytime you go somewhere, anytime you go to an event where you don't know anyone or you're not quite sure of the process, you're basically going in blind, right? And so you just need someone to like tell you what to do and tell you where to go. And so I bring that sort of like sense of hospitality to every single event that we do. Now, I will say a lot of times, the actual planning process is something I had to learn. How do I keep my clients on track? How do I make sure they're doing what they need to do? How do I make sure that I'm not just, making decisions for them and we're kind of co-creating an event together? So those are things I definitely had to learn. And I definitely didn't, failed a few times with particular clients, specific clients who had different expectations than what we were contracted for. And so, it definitely was at least a 5-year process to learn our process of how we work with clients the best. But in terms of some of the small kind of like intuitive knowledge around how this process should go so that people can have a great experience, that was definitely something that I learned from growing up.
That's really cool. Yeah. So let's take that and work it into this personality type of ENFP. And ENFP listeners, here's a reminder about what that stands for and means about Lauren's best marketing strategy. And as you are going to realize, her business's offerings too. It's all kind of like wrapped up into one. So the ENFP, E stands for extrovert, N stands for intuitive, F stands for feeling, and P stands for perceiving. All together, the kind of the name for this personality type is called campaigner. And how we see ENFPs really operating just naturally in our world is being that natural matriarch role and hosting and mentoring people. So it's not just creating the incredible space and creating the great experience, but it's also taking this host/mentor role to really gain the respect of the people that they're welcoming in. And through that respect, can really guide and lead in a unique, very welcoming and powerful way. We've spoken about this ENFP personality type in episode 97 with Chris Emmer and also in episode 127 with Tasha Booth. Chris and Tasha are also both ENFPs, so they'll be able to speak into this in different ways, give you new perspectives if you're new to the podcast and haven't listened to those yet, and you're an ENFP. That'll be super helpful. So, natural host and mentor. And here you are, Lauren, planning and producing, executing these incredible events that you don't necessarily host them, you plan and manage them, but I'm sure there's this element of being the planner that is also somewhat being the host and managing all parts of the experience so everyone can feel welcome and at home. How does that feel for you as you listen through to all that?
Yeah, whenever I always recommend, especially if you're hosting a dinner party or a big, large conference, there are two roles. There's like the logistical executor, the person who, and, growing up, I saw this with my parents. My mom was kind of the logistical executor who was like cooking and making sure everyone had a drink. And my dad was sort of like the front of house host. Like he was the one who answered the door and he was the one who said, let me take your coat and can I get you a drink? And so every event has those two roles. You need someone kind of focused on behind the scenes, cleaning up, making sure the experience stays seamless. And you need someone who's going to be like the outgoing one who's, talking to people, connecting them and being sort of the glue that holds the event together. And if you're doing an event by yourself, usually the executor is, the staff at whatever venue you choose. But if you're doing it at your house or if you're doing it, for a group of people, you sort of need to think about like, how can I take the executor role off my plate, whether that's a planner or a friend or my partner. Those two roles are really, really important. And it's really hard to do them simultaneously at an event larger than like 10 people. So when I work with clients, we're usually the executor role. We're making sure that our client has all of the runway and all of the space to be able to be a great host, to be able to talk to their guests, to be able to casually get their guests a drink without any sort of friction, to be able to connect their guests. So we always think about how we can make our clients the best, kind of like hosts that they can be by executing really, really well. So that's kind of how I think of it when I'm working with a client.
Okay, so your company is taking the role of the executor and this is probably super key to why you're so good at this, you're also preparing the actual host, the host company, to be a great host and take on that role. How do you help them do that? Because you probably do it so naturally. So do you work with them in the event planning process to make sure that they're fully ready? And how would you go about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of times that involves like pre-planning of staff. So some companies will be like, will you staff the whole event? And we say, we will staff the things that are important for us to staff, but we need your team to staff the things that are important for you to staff. And so those are any sort of like client-facing interactions. Like we're happy to interface with clients, but it's more important for our clients to be at the places where their guests are going to be. So cocktail hours or facilitated lunches or even registration, because you want your team or yourself to have a presence at the place where you don't want to be like in the back. I think sometimes people are like, I'm going to host an event and all I'm going to do is stand on stage and speak and like impart my great knowledge upon everyone. But that's like the worst thing you can do. You really want to be at those touch points to kind of more casually get to know your attendees, because events for the most part are less about the content and more about the connection. It's more about getting to know people, chatting with them one-on-one informally. The content is great, but most people come to events to build a network, meet people who are kind of where they're at and sort of feel a little bit more connected to a community than, the great insight that comes from, a specific speaker or something. So whenever we work with our clients, we always say, here are the roles that we need your team to fill. Here are the roles that we'll fill. And a lot of that stuff is back of house, working with vendors, things like that. But like a registration table or a lunch facilitator, or I'm trying to think of like other roles, if you're doing any sort of activities or like fun activities in the morning or before, after your conference, always want someone from your team at those activities to sort of build relationships. Those are important places for our clients to be. We take care of the less client facing things because because relationship building is important. And you can't just assume that relationship building will happen when you're on stage speaking about, the topic you're passionate about. So yeah, that's how we prep companies, is we make sure that their people or they are at the places that they need to be.
That's cool. I can see this being really helpful, not just for ENFPs, but also for the ESFJ personality type, because they're typically the ones planning the event, but not necessarily hosting it. And so I can see that being super helpful. And especially I can see how, if being that you, Lauren, are a natural host, I can totally see why this is working so well, because you're taking the time to prep the host client to be a great host. So then your company can shine in the executor role. All of that makes a ton of sense. And I'm curious, in your own company, forget about how you show up at the events that you've planned. In your own company, what kind of staff, what kind of team do you have around you to allow you to stay in this really clutch role and have the other things that don't come as naturally or that you don't love as much, and they take care of that? How do you have your team set up around you to allow for that?
Yeah. So a lot of event planning is really like annoying detail work, right? It's like efficiency work and thinking through a process, which is honestly like not my forte, which sometimes I'm like, how did I build a business in a skill set that's not really mine? And I'll give you like a really brief example. So this is going to sound ridiculous. So we did an event last week. We rented a set of linen, it was an overnight camp. So we had to rent all of the linens. We rented them from, a place that was about an hour away. And so in order for like the process before, like the planning process before was thinking all the way through, like, we have to get these linens, then we have to get the sound system. We have to get, go to the grocery store and get a bunch of stuff. Then we have to go to the retreat center. So months ago, I was like, okay, in order for us to do this the most efficient way, thinking through all of those things, we have to fly into a different airport. We have to rent a car at the airport instead of like a bigger car that doesn't, because what if our flight's delayed, which it ended up being delayed. And so we would have, the car rental place would have been closed had we not done the one at the airport. And then, we had to go pick up the linens at the linen company. Then we had to go get the sound system and make sure that the car was big enough. So all of these things that are like this is like not my forte. but this is something that my team, I have to have members on my team who are like extreme questioners, who are like, well, then what? What about this? And then what about this? And then are we going to have room in the car for that? And then, how do we get it all back? So that's the kind of team that I have. I have one full-time employee, and then we have a team of, about 2 or 3 contractors we work with, just depending on where the event is and how many people and what sort of support we need. But usually, I have a team member who's like thinking through all of those, like, first step this, then step this. What if it's not, what if it's not big enough? How do we fit all that together? And then the other part is like trial and error. Like, definitely we've gone to events and we've been like, okay, yeah, this will totally fit. And we get there and it doesn't fit and we have to like problem solve. And so that's, another skill that my team has, is kind of like showing up on site. There's a disaster. We have to problem. And that's sort of a combination of my experience in events and also, the best we can do with the resources available at the time. So that's kind of what the team looks like. I'm definitely the more like experienced person. And then my team is the one who's like, what's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 process to get us to the experience?
This is a perfect example. And this is like a little love note out to all ENFPs, and I'm going to extend it to ENFJs as well, because I'm an ENFJ and I feel like this is absolutely what I need as well. A team of extreme questioners. Did y'all hear Lauren say that? A team of extreme questioners. This is key for those of us who hold that vision, like you and I, Lauren, hold that vision. We know what that end product really needs to look and feel like, and end experience needs to be. And we can think through the big efficient markers, right? Like the checkpoints of the big things that need to happen. And then if we're not careful, I'm going to just speak for myself, but I can kind of only assume that you know what I'm saying here. It's like, if we're not careful, we can get a couple steps too far ahead and miss something a couple steps back. And having that team of extreme questioners around is going to make sure that we don't miss those details. That is a huge takeaway
Mhm.
for all of us. So good. Does that annoy you sometimes to have those people like questioning every little thing?
No, I mean, no, I think, it's a role that I like had to sort of force myself into for a long time because I was the only one in the company
Okay.
for, most of it. So I was that person for a long time. And it was like a really big lift for me to try to be like, okay, this isn't going to fit. And, it's that kind of stuff
Mhm.
is not it's like not my ministry. It's like,
Mhm.
like I really have to force myself to do it and ask all the questions and play that role with my clients. But to have someone on the team who's better at that than me is crucial and important. And sometimes I'm glad that I'm the kind of person who's like, the more questions, the better, because then it helps me clarify the process and make sure we haven't missed anything. So yeah, no, it's all good.
That's so good to hear. I think sometimes I can, and I've seen this in other people like me, I can get so excited about that end vision and I just want to get there. And sometimes that extreme questioning can feel like it's holding me back and slowing down the process. But at the end of the day, it's making everything much better. So the healthy way in which you're looking at that, I'm taking notes. I'm gonna take that in as well because they're gonna allow us to create a better product in the end. So it's good. I'm gonna take a little detour and ask you, I want to talk about negotiation because you're
Oh
planning.
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, good. All right, you're on board. So you're planning these huge events with these big clients. There has got to be some pretty major negotiation involved, right? So how do you manage that? How do you approach that? How do you make it work for you?
Yeah. So a lot of therapy to start with. I think, yeah, I've been a lot better at like asking for what we need. And that again has come through a lot of like small work. There's a great book that I'm in the process of reading and it's called Never Split the Difference. And
Yes.
it's about negotiation and it's from a hostage negotiator. He was a
Yeah.
hostage negotiator in New York. So it's all about, sort of what pieces of language help us feel more connected to other people such that we eventually get what we want. And I think sometimes people think negotiation has to be hard and tough and, you're bullying someone. But the reality is you're making requests and you're allowing other people to do what they can to fulfill those requests in a way that not only serves you, but also serves them. So I just had actually one of the biggest negotiations that I've done with a hotel, maybe a couple weeks ago, and it was so funny because I had done it with this same client a year ago, and we actually had a third person who was managing most of the negotiation. So I sort of was just watching it, and that process was the negotiator that we were working with at the time was not acting. It's not that she wasn't acting in our best interest, but her kind of end goal was, she got a commission off of what we spent. And so she was not incentivized to get us the lowest price. And so she wasn't as she didn't make as many requests as she could have.
Mhm.
And so this year, when I was in charge of the negotiation, I was like, at what point can I feel uncomfortable enough to get a no? Right. So usually, we're like, oh, we don't want to offend anyone. But I was like, I want to get to the point where someone says no, because if they're not saying no, it means it's within their power and they can do it. So I always really, really try to for a no, because if I'm not, you have no idea what the other person is capable of giving you. And so the goal is no, but until you get to know, you have to have some yeses. You're probably going to get some yeses in the way and kind of on the process to know. And you have no idea. So like me, I created this whole kind of, we got this contract. I created a whole kind of counter contract. And I was like, my hope was that they gave us 50% and they gave us like 90% of the things that we asked for. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was way better than what I could ever have imagined. And if I hadn't asked for all of those things, assuming I was only going to get 50%, we wouldn't have done what we did, which basically was like, we cut our costs in half from the previous year. Like we're crushing. Anyway. So yeah, it's definitely a skill to learn. But I think also for me as a woman, I think, we're kind of socialized to like make life convenient for other people. And so practicing getting to know has been a really great practice over the last couple of years, not only with, outside vendors, but also with my own clients who, there was a time where I was charging half of what I charge and I was getting a lot of yeses. And I had a coach who was like, you need to get to know, like you need to get to the point where someone's like, no, we're not going to pay this because you're getting all these yeses, which means it means like you're paying yourself, but it also means that you are taking more clients than you need to be taking. So you have to really try to get to know. So we doubled our rates, changed our kind of like request strategy and like process of how we like get people in the door. And it's been way better for our bottom line, but it's also been really good for me to send out proposals with a big ticket number, because that, people aren't usually like upset when I send it. They're usually like, this is either over our budget, or they say, yeah, we can totally pay you this. So it's been definitely the last like year or two has been like a big exercise in negotiation, me like feeling confident in going out and negotiating. But the goal is for me is always to get to a no at some point, because that means I'm on track to, finding the sweet spot of what I can charge and what other people are willing to accept or pay.
Total paradigm shift there. Like as soon as you said that, I typed that into my notes. You try to get a no. That is incredible. I love it. Go for it. That's so good. And that's one thing I see from ENFPs, like this unwillingness to accept anything other than what's ultimately possible. And in the best possible way, like you just believe the best in people. And because of that, you can go for it and you can hone these skills like negotiation in a way that I think some people might be a little bit more blocked off from. So that is so cool. I am definitely going to be applying that to my own stuff. And we'll definitely link to that book, Never Split the Difference. It's one that I recommend to a lot of people based on type. And we'll definitely link to that in the show notes, listeners. So if you want to go grab that, definitely go do that. Okay, so we are finally at the place where we can talk about this super cool thing you do. So as an ENFP, not only are you great at offering these event planning services, but you're also using your hosting skills to create relationships and in turn build your network. So can you tell us about your brilliant dinners that you host that allow you to create and foster really great relationships? I think the first time I heard you talk about this and share this idea with the group that you were speaking to that I was in, I just thought, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant. This is what every ENFP needs to hear about. So tell us about these dinners that you do.
Yeah. So this is actually like, it's so funny to me because this is like a really common strategy in like the corporate world. And so usually lots of people will go to conferences and they don't know anyone, or maybe they know one person. And I was also going to these conferences, and you would go and you would like maybe meet someone, or maybe you knew someone that was coming online, and you try to like text them and maybe grab lunch and you see them at a session. And it was sort of like making connection was sort of like a cross your fingers and hope you can do it. Or it was like you pre-planned a ton and you scheduled yourself out so that you didn't have any downtime because you're always connecting with people, but you weren't sure if the relationships that you were forming were going to be great. So what I've done in the past is the first night of a conference, barely anyone has pre-planned dinner plans. You go, maybe there's like a welcome party or something like that, or some sort of like brief content in the afternoon. And then usually people go to the welcome party and then they sort of like are in this room and they're like, hey, you want to get dinner? Like, hey, you want to meet up? And you don't know if those people are going to be good conversationalists, if they're people you want to meet, if you're going to have like a meaningful conversation. You don't really know. The first night of a conference is always like the most stressful. So what I've done in the past, and this again is common in the corporate world, is I will host a dinner for about like maybe 6 to 12 people, definitely like less than 15, but sort of somewhere in that like more manageable where you could have an entire group discussion or you could have sort of like 2 groups discussing. And I'll host a dinner that first night and I'll just invite maybe like 20 people because some people say no. So I'll invite like around 20 people, just blind on the internet. I'll say, hey, we're doing this dinner. We're going to have like some discussion about, whatever the topic is. I usually pay for dinner. And depending on the city that you go to, you can definitely get like a pretty good deal for that many people. I think the last event that I did, I hosted maybe 12 people and it was like $1,000, which, if you're doing a Facebook ad spend, you might, it's like, just part of my marketing budget. I probably do it a couple times a year, but it's the best way for me to form relationships with people that I know are either well networked, they maybe like haven't heard of me and I want to form a relationship with them, or they work for a client that I potentially could want to work for, or they have a good network themselves. And, I want to, just be in the room with them and get to know them and talk to them a little bit more. And so for me, the power of getting, 6 to 10 or 12 people in the room and having a personal conversation with every single one of them and telling them about my business and telling them what I do and getting their attention for like 5 to 10 minutes pays extraordinary dividends if eventually at one point, a year or 6 months, they refer me to someone who's looking to plan an event. And then we charge between $20,000 and $30,000 for our services. So like I spend $1,000 on a dinner of cool people that I want to get to know. We book one client, it pays for itself times 30. So it's one of my favorite strategies. I'm definitely more of a like one-on-one person. It's hard for me to do sort of like the big, talking into the expanse of the internet. And so this is a way that I can do that and get my name out there and be a part of the online community because, forming those like really close one-on-one relationships pays dividends in my business because we offer high-end services. So that's something that I try to do about once a quarter.
So smart. And, some people might have thought, oh my gosh, you pay for everybody's dinner. But as you break it down like that, like $1,000 to make 30, I would take that bet every day, like every single day. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that does not,
Yeah.
it's like a drop in a bucket. That's so good. So when you host these people, you said that obviously trying to have some personal conversation with everyone in the room. And they're, of course, having conversation amongst themselves. Do you do any kind of guided conversation to create talk or discussion around a specific topic just to lead the dinner along?
Yeah, totally. I think usually the formula is I usually do sort of a cocktail, 30 minutes to let everybody arrive so everybody can get a drink and whatever. And then I sort of like encourage everyone to sit down and have dinner. There's usually like a salad course. And then, we'll go around and I'll kind of have everyone introduce themselves or ask a prompt or whatever. And usually I try to do it in a creative way. I usually try to say, tell us who you are and what your business is. And then also, one of my favorite questions is, what do you want to celebrate for the last, over the last 12 months? What's one thing you want to celebrate that maybe you haven't that you can celebrate tonight? And that like brings up all kinds of things for people. Some people are like, I quit my job. I like did this, And so that's sort of a way to give people the permission and the space to talk about their accomplishments in a way that I think sometimes at conferences, and you let me know if this is like not your experience, but sometimes at conferences, especially ones where you maybe like in the online space or there's a lot of like flexing happening. People are trying to like prove their worth when they show up because they want to be accepted. They want someone to think that they're important and impressive and they're so I get that. It's sort of a barrier of like, I want you to think I'm important. And so let me tell you about all the cool things that I've done and the cool clients that I work for and blah, 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 blah. And that sort of, even though we think that fosters connection, it totally like it like turns competitive in a way that might not be positive. And so in these dinners, I really try to let people have the space to talk about the things that they're really proud of and be celebrated and celebrate themselves without it being sort of like a competitive like wall of strength. And so I really try to like build in space for vulnerability and also like set the tone in the beginning to say, we're going to share some things and these are, it's only for here, please, nothing said in this room, because we want to respect the like privacy. And I think especially in the online world and also in the corporate world, that's like really rare and unique. But I feel like it's something that people really want the space to feel like they can be vulnerable. They can talk about the things that they're excited about without feeling like they're, bragging or whatever, because they know that everybody else also has similar, wins that they want to celebrate. Mm-hmm. So I really try to come at it from a place like vulnerability and honesty. And I try to model that. I try to talk about things that are hard and because that gives other people the opportunity to talk about vulnerable things. But as the host, it's, I know that everything that I do, especially, it's so funny, like I'll invite people who I like really admire and then they come into the room and they're like, you must be a big deal because you got all these people in the room. And I'm like, no, I'm just the person that like reached out and asked everyone to come. And so it sort of like elevates me and like people who host to a level of, of the gatherer, the person who's doing the thing. And oh my gosh, you must, have such great relationship. And the reality is I'm just the one who asked, but I know that people are watching me. And so I have to like go out there and like model the sort of event that I want to have and be as vulnerable as I want to be and tell the stories that I want to tell so that other people feel like they can also do that. And so that's kind of how I like to think about it.
So key.
And that's everyone, right? Like you could be like, let's talk about a tactical process. And that could be the modeling behavior. And people could walk away with like a really great step-by-step process or way of thinking about something that they haven't thought about before. I'm just more of a feelings person. So
Oh, me too, sister. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. After that initial intros, prompt them with a question. Do you guide the conversation after that throughout dinner, or do you kind of just like let it roll as it rolls?
yeah, I mean, usually, so I think the worst thing, I always have like a couple questions in my back pocket, but usually by the time people go around and say like the thing they want to celebrate, then there's a course coming, like a meal, like a meat dish or whatever. So then I usually give people a break to sort of like eat their food because here's the thing is like if everyone's talking in a circle, nobody's eating. So I don't want like their meal to get cold. So we take a break from talking, they eat their meal, and then they have like something to actually talk about, right? They talk about like, oh, that thing that you said, or tell me more about this thing or whatever.
Right.
And then usually after that piece of the meal is cleared, then we do another, some other prompt just based on, what came up. Or I always like to say like, what's one thing that you overcame, or what's one struggle you've gone through in your business that you'd like to talk about, or something like that, just depending on the crowd. So I usually try to do one more prompt before the evening's over. And then usually what happens is, people at that point feel comfortable enough to sort of have their own conversations, and I sort of just let them kind of chat. So usually 2 prompts, but I always have a couple kind of in my back pocket just in case. But yeah.
That's so good. That's so good. I can just feel, I mean, this jazzes me up. Like, I feel like I want to do this. It just sounds really fun. And I'm not even an ENFP, so I can't even imagine what the natural hosts and gatherers of people are feeling about this. They're like, I know that they're just on fire and be like, oh my gosh, when can I go to a conference and when can I do this next? Because this is going to be so much fun. So very cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all of that with us. That is so
it's been,
and
of course. Cool. I had a group of women over to my house recently. And again, I do this because I love it, but I had a group of women over at my house maybe like a couple of weeks ago. And there were, I think like 6 or 7 of us. And it wasn't, my intention was not to like, really go into, I really was just like, let's get together and chat. But we were a small enough group of people where I was like, well, why don't we see if this format works? And these women were not business owners. We all sat on a board together. So that's how we knew each other. And they were all much kind of like across the age range spectrum. There were some people who were much older and retired. There were some people who were kind of like, closer to my age, but we had a similar discussion around, like what lights us up and things like that. And after that event, people were like, I feel so grateful that I, got the opportunity to share these things and blah, 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 blah. So I think no matter what industry you're in, or no matter what group of people you want to feel a stronger connection with, this format can work just depending on, how you want to feel in your community.
Yeah, it's creating that intentional container that allows for these conversations to happen and those connections to be sparked. Oh, it's so good. And it's honestly, I know you said that in the corporate world, it's pretty common. I don't know that it's common. It's not common in the spaces that I run in, at least that from what I've seen. So I'm excited for this to be more of a thing, regardless of how anyone uses it in their business or not. I just like the idea of people coming together and having dinner, breaking bread, and having conversations like this, and having hosts like you lead us in that, because it's within that collective experience that we all feel a little bit more nourished than just going to dinner with whoever you met that day, And so thank you for sharing all of that. So take us into the vision for your company in the next year. Where are we headed with this?
Oh, this is like the hardest question. Yeah. It's funny because I think whenever you start a project, a branding project, or a new sort of like identity identifying a process, like who am I? What are we doing? How do we serve the world? What are our gifts kind of scenario? That process changes, but it's always, that's always the first question is like, where are we going to be in a year? And, one of the prompts that I always use when I'm doing that for my clients, like, how do you want people to feel at this event? Paint me the picture. What do people tell you that you do well? And how can we amplify that at the event? People always tell me like the thing that I do really well is I ask great questions. I create great space. I hold containers for people. And so while I love planning events, I know that there's more room for me to do more facilitation to kind of bring this model to, companies that want to have similar relationships with their peers, to host my own peers around strong conversations. So I think there's some inklings. I haven't like decided, but there's some inklings around working on, developing my facilitation skills and space holding skills and sort of doing some of this work on behalf of other companies who may not have someone who's great at it. Because facilitation is, we've all been to some sort of like workshop or something where the facilitator is like not holding the container correctly and it's going off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a skill that I'm interested in exploring to add sort of as a service or at least as a piece of the business that we haven't really explored yet. So it's kind of where we're going. We still have, we have great clients, but we'd like to add the facilitation piece too.
Yeah, I can so see that. I can so see that for you. Okay, so where can the listeners find you online and support what you already have going on and support this vision? Where are we connecting with you?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. My website is laurencaselli.com, very creative. And then I'm most active probably on Instagram at Caselli Events.
Perfect. Okay, so we've linked to all of that. So awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Lauren. Listeners, go find Lauren. Learn from her presence online, what she's doing, what she's up to, especially if you're an ENFP. And I'll catch you back here next week on the Marketing Personalities Podcast. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Marketing Personalities Podcast. Now it's time to connect your marketing strategy to your personality type. Go to marketingpersonalities.com/MPP to download your marketing personality type full report. Use the code MPP at checkout to get $10 off. And that's a super special code for podcast listeners as a way to say thank you for being here. In your full report, you'll learn about your personality type, how it relates to the work you do, what your best marketing strategy includes so you can start implementing it right away, what your worst marketing strategy includes so you can avoid it, and so much more. Go to marketingpersonalities.com/MPP to get your full report and use the code MPP at checkout to receive $10 off your purchase. And one more thing before you skip on to the next podcast. Would you please share this episode with your entrepreneur friends who also need to feel good about their marketing strategies? Take a quick screenshot of your podcast app right now and share it out via text, Facebook, or my favorite, Instagram. Remember to tag me at Marketing Personalities in the photo so I can be sure to send you a huge high five and thank you for sharing the love. This podcast is edited and produced by the Podcast Engineers. They're pretty great, and you can find them at podcastengineers.com. That's all for now. Thanks as always for listening, and I'll catch you back here next week on the Marketing Personalities Podcast. Love ya. Bye.